Our story begins with someone who broke the stereotype of using a sword for a knight to reach the category of master. He was known as the peerless knight of the spear, the greatest hero who ended the war of the Avalon Empire, considered the strongest of the continent of Ingram. His name was Joshua Sanders, but we are shown that he is wounded, very badly wounded, and people make fun of him. To think that for so long he was so strong, but as strong as he was, he couldn't resist that. He asks why they were doing that to him. They make it clear to him that he was a martial artist who had developed his mastery to an unparalleled limit. He asks them again. He never coveted the throne. He never had the desire to obtain the first place. He only wanted the whole world to know the greatness of his spear, and thus escape from the life full of pain. As the son of a concubine, he helped his lord, who was also his best friend, to end the war of the empire. He wanted to be the shield that would defend them all. So why was he being betrayed? They say to him, Joshua, everyone thinks you are now a threat to the world with just your existence. Since the civil war is over, the emperor can now get everything he craves without any danger. And now the only thing they fear is him. Joshua suffers unimaginable pain. That orb they had in their hands had been found in the ruin of Ammon. The general also confesses to him that he was afraid of that spear. They were all afraid that it would cut them into 1,000 pieces. They thank him for all he did for them. They would not be there without him. They are sincerely grateful. Nevertheless, they say goodbye. The one who was their best friend couldn't see what they were doing, so he leaves and they all follow him. Joshua shouts wildly that they hadn't seen the last of him. As they're leaving, an explosive magic circle appears. Curses. At that speed, he was going to die. He wonders if the Knight of the Unrivaled Alliance was just an empty man. In the end, he was just a lousy knight who was betrayed by a trusted friend and was about to die in the nameless forest. But something glows. It was his spear, Lugia. He always knew he had special powers, but he didn't know he could have that kind of power. He tells himself to move, and in that situation, he only needed a little more to hold on to what gave him so much joy. But an explosion makes itself felt. The distinguished individual from the country of the Knights of the Empire of Avalon, Joshua Sanders, met an end that did not befit his fame as a knight of the undefeated alliance. But a boy wakes up and wonders if he was in a stable or what was going on. He must have been killed by the explosion. He can't believe it. So he sees the reflection, and he had gotten younger, but realizes he had gone back to the past. That meant they had a second chance to take down all those bastards. To his side, they ask him why he was in that place. Instead of cleaning up horse manure, he realizes that those guys must have been the Duke's soldiers. His uncles, Rolls, Roy, and Gord, look at him with a defiant face, but make it clear to him that the boy was mute. Of course, they were not going to answer him. They were looking for Lucia, but one of them tells him to keep his voice down, because sometimes the Duke would look for her from time to time. Joshua remembers. Lucia was his mother's name. The exclusive servant of the Agnes family makes it clear that the Duke forcibly slept with her, and he was born. The soldiers harassed the protagonist because they knew he was a legitimate son, with noble blood inside him, especially those three guys. But someday, he will get revenge on them. They target the protagonist. It was the perfect opportunity to get rid of that child. As Duchess Vanessa had said that if they ever got rid of Lucia and her son, she would take responsibility for it. They were bored and couldn't play with Lucia, so they were going to play with him. The Prota, enraged inside, couldn't stand them insulting his mother. Clenching his fists, he wonders if the mana training method he had been training in earlier will work. This was a method he discovered in some ancient ruins, and the training effect was exceptional, allowing him to reach the optimal state in a short time. It was a totally different mana method from the rest. In that world, one had to have years of training to be able to use mana, but thanks to that he had a great advantage. The guys laugh and are going to beat him up for thinking he's a brigand. They could feel his anger just by looking at his face. They stop him. It looked like he was angry because he wasn't able to get the lady the Duke easily hit on. They tell him to shut up, and now he is angrier than usual, so he couldn't hold back. They wonder what he was doing. He looked like he had fainted from fear. Joshua just asks to have just a little bit of mana. He just needed to have just a little. The guy senses something and jumps to attack, but Joshua, with a closed fist imbued with mana, punches him in the stomach. They wonder what just happened. Roy pulls out his real sword. He looked like he had a death wish. That was dangerous. That young crow couldn't stand up against a sword-trained soldier, but he had to defend himself. He had to gather some more mana. They scream at him that today was the day of his death. The protagonist was exhausted and felt his body tired. Rolls was the only guy he had left, but he was the strongest. However, he could not show weakness before him, yelling at him to come closer. She reprimands him so she could talk, and he explains that from that moment on, including everyone in the house, any other bastard who insults his mother swears him by name. He will kill every one of them. Rolls, seeing that intimidating look, he runs away, but between closing his eyes, Joshua could no longer stand it and faints. The rumor had spread. The servants were already talking about young Joshua beating the three brothers. That could mean that he was stronger than young Babel. They denied it. This was an orphan who even yesterday could not speak, and young Babel was a prodigy in all areas, awakening mana at only 16 years old. This was an accomplishment that no one in the kingdom had ever achieved. He was a genius who eclipsed any other. He is then explaining what happened to the Duke, but they didn't believe him, as Joshua was only 9 years old and no one at that age could do anything to an orc armor unless they could use mana. The subgeneral denies it. It was impossible. It was unheard of for the kingdom, and for the entire history of the continent. Had to be at least a C-ranked knight to accomplish such a feat. They reproached him that he was lying and that he had just made it up. They were going to be punished with death, but he tearfully told them that no, it was true. They were going to be beheaded for lying, but the Duke stops him. He is going to go personally to find out what happened. Chiffon cannot understand it. To think that the Duke would want to meet the son of a concubine. He had not even responded with the young Master Babel, who was known as the greatest talent in the Empire. Then, outside the hall, Babel asks him what he was doing there, but Jacoa was looking at a picture on the wall. It was the father of his best friend. He curses, no matter how long it takes, but he will take revenge on him. A punch comes close for ignoring him, but Jacoa stops it. He wonders if it was real that he had defeated the three of them with that great power. But perhaps he thought he would stand still and just. The Duke arrives. They ask him to do the Duke the honors. However, he stops him. His eyes were full of displeasure. He tells him that if he was serene, he could approach. Taking his hand, he goes to discover what he was hiding. He is surprised, but says there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. Babel and Chiffon calmed down. They knew. The Duke argues that it was surprising. Anyone in that living world had at least a hint of mana. However, Joshua had absolutely nothing, but he had something sticky that made him feel disgusted. She was going to keep a close eye on him. Joshua is ordered to stay in the castle, as there were enough empty rooms. Starting the next day, Joshua was to begin the basics of being a knight, and if he showed talent, he was to be informed. The Duke intended to teach him all the mana methods of the Red Knight Order. They had high expectations for Joshua. Meanwhile, those two, they were stunned. Arriving at his bed, he remembers those words and knows that they expected good results from him. At night he wakes up and feels he has something to do. He jumps out of the window, and as he does so, a lump of mana reacts inside his belly. He realizes it was Lugia, but Lugia was suppressing the demonic energy and divine powers he was feeling. At that moment, it was not important. He had to hurry to a hut in the forest. Lucia asked why they were doing that, and that they should let her go. That was because her son had denigrated their names. She bites him to free herself, but they beat her. They explained to her that they were going to make things quick, but he had made things more difficult and should keep her still. He would take care of the rest. He stops them. If the little boy found out, they would end up dead. They tell him to let them go, since that little boy had beaten them, and the Duke's wife was going to take care of everything else. They were going to start taking his clothes off, but a halt is heard. They were waiting for it. They wanted to show him something. Seeing his mother, Joshua's eyes and body fill with anger, he expresses to them that they were not going to get out of there alive, and tells someone to get lost. They face him, but he repeats he was to get lost, and someone falls from the sky, and Joshua realizes that that red cross was one of the Duke's 3 knights. That meant they had been sent by the Lord himself. They pay him honors, and Joshua was all clear. The soldiers tried to harm a recognized member of the kingdom, and according to martial law, he asks him what should be done in such cases. He is astonished and does not understand such pressure that emanated from that child, but he wields his sword. The execution was immediate. But at the last moment, the protagonist tells him to stop and put away his sword. He is thanked on his knees and is going to serve him for the rest of his life, but Joshua denies it. He didn't need someone like him. He would never forgive those who would show their fangs to him or his people. However, since he was quick, he knew he would understand his words and must tell the soldiers what he had seen today, leaving out no details. If anyone dared to do such a thing again, he would end their worthless lives with his own hands. If he understood, he was to get out of their sight. Then his mother appears behind him, and Joshua hugs her and cries. He tells her that from now on he will protect her, come what may. He was sincerely grateful for the heavens for giving her another chance in her regret-filled youth. This time it would be different. He was no longer the lowly son of a stable concubine, but the strongest spear on the continent. We are then told that the great lord will meet with two families, one of which is Isla and Rebecca, a gene of magic that drew the attention of the empire, similar to Babel. They were looking for an alliance, but Babel already had Miss Charlie, daughter of Font, who was made a duke because of his great wealth. It would be best to marry her to strengthen the influence of the two kingdoms. He asks her how Joshua was doing, as he was thinking of giving her to Celine. Meanwhile, the main hero climbs a cliff and remembers that he often came there to feel close to his late mother. By chance, he had discovered a secret path and uses the dripping ability and opens a portal to enter an unknown room. When he first discovered it, it was not as ruined as it is now. But inside the temple, on top of a podium, Lugia was trapped and wrapped in chains. But now there was nothing, and as he touches an iron bar, a light permeates the room. And when he opens his eyes, he doesn't know where he is. Something calls out to him and tells him that it was not just an iron bar. It was the spirit of the demon god, Lugia. Lugia warns him that the two energies inside his body will corrupt over time. The only way to settle the two energies and regain the latent strength within him is to reach stage 4 of the martial arts of magic dance. This means that he must achieve this stage in a short period of time. Joshua wonders if the 4th stage in the ancient way of the spear could be achieved at such a young age. Previously, the sword was considered the best weapon for a knight, and spears were considered weak weapons. However, only a handful of people managed to fight effectively against him. At that time, his martial art was in the 4th stage. If he were to be rated as a knight, he would be a rank A, an absolute being of 8 ranks. However, his spear skill only reached the 5th stage, but he became the strongest knight in the empire. Rank 4 was just below the level of an uncontested B rank. However, it would not be easy at all to reach that level. Besides, he had no time, and the problem was mana cultivation. It would be even more difficult, as it could destroy his body. But Lugia calms him down. He didn't have to worry. As long as they were together, they could do it. Joshua agreed. He could do it. That method was unique to his continent. And first, he had to discover the number 1 stage of the magic spear. Concentrating all his power, he manages to do it. He uses the martial arts of magic dance stage 1, which is to concentrate the mana on a single point and stab forward with explosive force. That's where his story really begins. It will grow stronger and take everything from you. Dreams, longings, peace of mind. He will take revenge on each of them. Later, in the Duke scene, we are told that Cheryl had a somewhat disrespectful personality, but the Duke liked her. She was accompanied by a servant who tried to control her vocabulary at all times. There was also the Count, Jean Rebecca, and his daughter, Iceland Jean Rebecca. They had all heard the rumors about Joshua, that he was born without mana and had the curse of mana. The Duke asks Ponsel if he could take care of him, as he had a keener instinct with mana. Chiffon asks the Duke to confirm that assumption, as there were other rumors that suggested that Joshua, having no mana, might have something more about demonic energy, so he was going to order the knights under his command to keep an eye on it. If it was as powerful as they said, he might be ready to take them on, and if not, they had someone perfectly capable of taking him on one-on-one. The next day, the protagonist finds himself in the Duke's hall. All the guests arrive to watch the duel. Chiffon believes that the protagonist is still rude to the Duke, not showing proper greetings. However, Joshua introduces himself and shows his respects. The Duke is surprised and laughs, as he didn't remember teaching him etiquette, but he is doing quite well. Joshua expresses that he only learned it by watching others. He had heard that they wanted to test him, but they deny it. The purpose of that duel was not to test him, but to find out what disability he had and provide appropriate treatment. Joshua wonders, disability? He was sure they were insulting him, and he was on Babel's side. He also thinks they are trying to kill him. He asks him if he is ready, and on the scene Babel arrives. As his older brother, he will do everything he can to help him, as he is very fond of him. They clarify that it was only a training fight, so they will not use real swords, but training swords. Babel chooses a sword and expresses that it will not be easy to confront him, as he was not playing around. The hero realizes that Babel and Chiffon wanted his end, so they gathered witnesses to denigrate his name and send him back to the stable. However, if they wanted a show, he will give them one. Picking up a wooden stick and breaking its tip, Iseline's daughter laughs. She finds that Guy was very funny, while Chiffon denies it. Asking if it was a joke, he wonders what he could do with a wooden stick, and the Duke stops him. Asking the protagonist if he was serious, he confirms what he was doing, and the Duke orders them to take their seats. He asks Babel not to use mana, and he agrees. He had nothing to worry about. He was not going to use mana against such a despicable being. The Duke gives the order to begin the combat. The combat begins, and Babel throws himself immediately. He receives a blow from the main hero. He is filled with rage, so he embles mana on his sword. The protagonist knows that receiving an attack at that distance was dangerous. The Duke orders them to stop, but Babel was furious and shouts that the Duke's successor was him. However, the main hero would not be left behind and is also determined to fight. When their swords clash, the Duke stops them and warns them that he would not spare them if they continue to fight. From that moment on, Chiffon can't believe it. Using mana at the age of 9 was something that had never happened in history. Everyone is amazed at Joshua's feat. The Duke expresses to him that he needs to ask him something and asks him to come to his room at night. This surprises everyone, as they had never called someone to their personal room. In the Countess's room, she was extremely angry for not doing her job properly and not destroying Joshua. But the Countess is reassured to learn that Joshua has passed the test of his abilities. He must now face a C-rank knight of the Avalon Empire, so he plans to contact his uncle. As for the main hero, he explains his reasons for fighting and wanting to go to the capital, as he wants to avoid problems with the family due to the association and raise his family to the highest level of the empire. He wants to go to the capital and be sent to the academy. It is explained that the children of the royal families of the Avalon Empire, from 10 to 15 years old, attend an academy in the capital for 6 years. But talented children can graduate earlier, such as Babel. The purpose of the academy is to instill royalty and look for useful talents. The Duke thinks that Boy was too wise for such a young age, so he promises to take him to the capital and visit him from time to time to instruct him himself. But the protagonist refused. He wished to learn the art of the spear, and not the long sword that the Duke mastered. He did not accept it. He thought he would use only a staff that time, but a spear was not worthy of a knight. But he would put him to a test to see if the protagonist was really worthy of learning the art of the spear. If he passed the test, the Duke would fulfill his request, but if he didn't, the main hero should go to the academy and learn fencing as he orders him to. Then, Duchess Vanessa asks an important favor from her uncle through a call from a crystal ball. After the bout, Joshua leaves the Duke's room with his body trembling due to the intensity of the duel. Babel approaches him and asks for another battle. His eyes reflected a fighting spirit and his desire not to want to lose again. Meanwhile, the king of the empire receives news about the Duke's 2 sons and is particularly interested in Joshua. He wants to see him personally, but will send a prince, as he could not leave the kingdom. Returning to the duel, the protagonist hits Babel with a punch imbued with mana. Although he doesn't want to admit it, he realizes that Joshua is much stronger than he is. Joshua asks him if he was frustrated. If he was, he had to get stronger. He should never forget that fall. He must never forget that feeling of defeat. If he wanted to progress, he had to try harder. In his heart, there was only hatred for him, but he had not seen such pure eyes of wanting to fight martial arts for a long time. So he will give him a second chance. He was to strive, and must never forget the gap between their power. However, if he ever touched or disgraced his mother again, he would give him such a beating that he would never pick up a sword again. Then, the next day, the protagonist was extremely tired. His body had not yet become accustomed to using so much magic. Just at that moment, there is a knock at the door of his room. Opening it, he finds the spoiled child. He wonders what she is doing there. She introduces herself and shows interest in him, wanting to enter the room. Joshua stops her and expresses to her to go fuck herself, as it was too early and she was bothering him. However, they knock on the door again. Joshua tells her again to leave, but this time it wasn't her. He apologizes to her. He had gotten confused. Then, she asks him if he had done what he ordered. He replies that he has, and that he has finished the preparation. Although she doesn't understand why he was doing that, she asks him to trust him and follow him. In the large training room were all the centurions. They ask Rolls where Gord and Joy were from, as rumors were circulating that Joshua had murdered them. Rolls does not answer, and seems to be acting strangely in their eyes lately. The knights resign themselves, and ask why they had been summoned. They reply that he had told them that the Knight of the Order of the Crimson Knights was going to take charge of them, so today's training would be intense. They ask for attention, and when they turn around they are all surprised to see the Knight Cain of the Order of the Crimson Knights, who was there. He was also accompanied by a young man. Rolls was visibly frightened. He wonders what the hell he was doing there. Cain introduces Joshua, who would be leading the training that day. He has been given the task of training the centurions, as they would become commanding officers of the vanguard. Their skill is crucial, so Joshua comes to test their strength. The centurions wonder what he was talking about. Was he being serious, or was he just joking? Even Cain asks him if he was serious, as fighting the centurions would be suicidal. They ask him again if it was a joke. However, Joshua takes a lance and asks Rolls if he thinks he was joking. Rolls denies it, asks him to shut up and watch everyone's reaction. Apparently, he hasn't told anything he said. He kneels but asks him to stand up, as he would not forgive him a second time. Even if death is fitting for the sin of threatening his mother, he is giving her another chance, but he himself is throwing it away. Or did he want to end up like his brothers? Rolls begs him to give him another chance, to which Joshua replies no, but at least it will allow him to keep his pride. They were to fight a duel to the death, so Roll draws his sword determined to put up a proper fight. Since his opponent was still a child, Joshua makes his first move, lightning attack first technique. Everyone was stunned. That was really the use of mana. They had to listen well and not judge their opponent by his appearance, as that could cost them their lives on the battlefield. If any of them still had doubts about his ability, they should confront him and see what he was capable of. In unison, each of the centurions honored him and proclaimed him as their master. Cain was truly happy, as Joshua far exceeded his expectation. He would make sure to be useful to him at all times. On the other hand, the lady was very sad because she was rejected, but the servant gave her news that the Order of Imperial Knights would arrive at the palace, although she showed no signs of improvement.